Before we get into the stories, I'm excited to announce I have a new channel called Monster Trail Cams. Here's a quick trailer for my new channel. The link is below. Monster Trail Cams is your ticket to the unseen and supernatural. Sourced from a vast network of mystery hunters worldwide, our channel reveals a collection of strange creatures and supernatural events that will leave you on the edge of your seat. From shadowy figures lurking in dense forests to inexplicable entities prowling under the cloak of night, each chilling clip peels back another layer of the world's untold mysteries. We release new episodes several times a week. Okay, now let's get to the stories. My fiancé and I took one of our bucket list vacations last winter near the Canadian border so that we could visit Niagara Falls. We were staying in a small log cabin, part of a campground, and planned on skiing and screwing around for the weekend. Unfortunately, that isn't exactly how things worked out. Initially, everything was great. We got there early, moved in, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. In fact, me and my wife were having an excellent time. That is, until nightfall. We were outside grilling, figuring out how to keep a fire lit. Neither of us are exactly camping experts, when we began to notice something awry. At first, all we could focus on was the smell, the horrendous, inhuman stench of pure rot. It was foul, worse than a skunk, worse than finding a dead mouse in your basement, just putrid. It seemed like it was far enough away at that point, just sort of wafting, but that definitely doesn't mean it was unnoticeable. Immediately, I wanted to go inside. I'm somewhat of a scaredy cat myself, and frankly, I had no interest in finding out more. My fiancé, on the other hand, is much braver than I, annoyingly so, a paramedic no less, and wanted to see what was the matter. They insisted that it might be a hurt animal, or if not, just something interesting to look at. Luckily, at this point, I talked them into waiting until the morning to investigate anything. After we finally managed to get the fire lit and have a few roasted marshmallows, we talked about heading in for the evening. Moments later, just as we put out the fire, we began to hear the oddest, most artificial cry for help. "Help me, please." I don't know how to describe it really, but I'll never forget how the voice made me feel. Unsettled. Awe. It was unnatural, like it was clear someone or something was mimicking the yell. Now, I've seen far too many horror films to go wandering into the forest looking for a mysterious wounded person. But my fiancé wanted to see what was going on, and I wasn't going to let them go alone. We agreed to only walk as far as we could while still seeing the cabin, still being lit up by the general property. I was not going anywhere too dark. So there we went, towards the direction of the ominous yelling, and evidently the same direction as the foul odor that seemed to grow more and more repulsive by the minute. This just convinced my fiancé that whoever it was yelling for help like that was injured in some gruesome way. Also, I don't want to sound like some uppity homebody who just isn't used to the smells of the great outdoors. I've been camping in my life more times than I could count, not to mention hunting and fishing, and I can promise you this smell wasn't the smell of any dead animal I've ever seen. My nostrils practically burned in reaction to that rot, and the closer we approached, the more eager I was to get the hell back into our cabin. But onward we went, and as the sound grew closer, the more distorted it became. I wouldn't have been surprised at that point if it was a recording or something. But that's just the thing. Once we got close enough to make out the shadow of a figure, the stature of the silhouette was terrifyingly large in comparison to the voice it was simulating. It was tall, too tall to be a person, or frankly, anything else I've ever seen. I have to admit, we didn't get a good look at the thing. When we made out the shape of it from about 15 feet back, something like that, I grabbed my fiancé and absolutely booked it. Now, I could be wrong. In fact, really, I hope that I am. Because by the looks of it, that thing, whatever it was about 8 feet tall with antlers. Unless a giant elk figured out how to stand on its hind legs, I really doubt that what we saw was any kind of animal. Naturally, we decided it was best to cut the trip short. We figured that instead of staying the week, we'd only stay for the rest of the weekend, then find a hotel somewhere. Now, here's the oddest part. The very next day, we go down to the main office building of the campground just to tell them about what we saw and everything. The guy looked uninterested as hell until I said the word antlers. After that, as I talked about the nasty ass smell, you could see the guy get practically as white as a sheet. It definitely didn't help calm my nerves, because as soon as we were done talking, the guy offered us half of our deposit back. I've never heard of someone getting offered money for spotting an animal on the property of a campground. I'll admit the following night, our last night, was in a lot of ways normal. Except, of course, for us being scared half to death that we were going to have our door smashed in by some weird creature. The moral of the story is, we're never heading back to that campground in that part of the country. Who knows what could have happened if we actually approached this thing? Just be careful when you're up in the east, and watch out for that stench. Nothing good will come of it, I can tell you that. I ended up losing my job because our business had to close, and I didn't have much savings built up. I was living in upstate New York at the time and had really been enjoying my independence. But then it was like everything changed almost overnight. My uncle flipped houses professionally and had purchased some cheap property in an old suburb up there. He was willing to let me move in for free while it was being worked on. It was pretty run down, but it had an extra bedroom that wasn't in the worst shape. And it had heating and running water, so I moved in and lived on the ground floor with my 2 cats. Things went along pretty okay for a couple of months. I don't exactly know why, but one day these 2 stray cats started hanging around my porch. I don't know if my cats attracted them or what. I did not encourage them at all. I never left food outside, and I kept trying to shoo them away. But they both would just look me in the eye and ignore my shooing and act like they belonged there. I guess I'm weak when it comes to cats, though, because I'll admit it wasn't long before I had 4 cats living inside with me. However, right after they moved in, things started feeling kind of weird in the house. I started hearing strange noises at night, and things would go missing, like pieces of my jewelry. Like I would take off my rings and earrings at night, but then one piece wouldn't be there in the morning. But then that piece would reappear later in the day, making me think I was going crazy. I admit I'm kind of an absent-minded person, so it's not that unusual for me to move stuff and then forget about where I put it. But it really felt like a lot of things. And then after a month or so, the cats started acting peculiar. They would gather and hiss at the door to the basement. All 4 of them. One time in the middle of the night, they started yowling so loud it woke me up. I went down to check on things, but they all just scattered. So, figuring I would get to the bottom of it, I opened the basement door and headed down to check it out. I got to the bottom of the stairs, but it just looked like a normal, creepy basement to me. And then it got worse. The cats started doing this every night. They would gather and start hissing and yowling at the basement door. I started thinking maybe there were rats in the basement or something. I told my uncle about it, and he called in an exterminator to lay down poison and traps. When the exterminator finished, he made a comment about how it was important to keep the cats out of the basement. When he said that, it occurred to me that not once had any of the 4 cats ever crossed the basement threshold, even though the door was open on a fairly regular basis. One day, I was in the kitchen doing the dishes, and my uncle was upstairs working on house repairs. Then I heard him walk across the creaky floor up there, and then I heard him break into a full run down the stairs to the first floor and toward the basement door. I assumed he went into the basement because I heard the door slam with so much force that it scared me, and I almost dropped the dish I was washing. I then walked over towards the basement door to see what had happened, and opened the basement door to yell at him for being such a bozo and scaring the hell out of me. That's when I heard a noise behind me and spun around to see my uncle coming down from upstairs to ask what all the commotion was about. Oh my God, was it not him that had gone down in the basement? We were the only 2 people in the house. When I realized that he had been upstairs the whole time, my blood ran ice cold. I told him that someone had run down the stairs and had slammed the door shut. He went down there to look and didn't find anything down there. So now I was feeling super uncomfortable about living there. I mean, the cat sounds at night were getting nuts, and I was so sleep-deprived I honestly started hallucinating. I went down there one night to shush them up, and I imagined I saw this old woman standing in front of the basement door, wagging her finger at them. Then they really started yowling. Everything was making me crazy. All the changes that the pandemic had caused, my stress over losing my job, my weird living arrangement, I was really over it. A week or two later, I made the hard decision to move back home with my parents in Connecticut. My uncle decided to sell the property to some developers. None of the repairs were going right. When he was selling it, he came across some information about an old woman who had lived there alone with her cats for years. She was found dead in the basement one day. It seems she died when she fell down the stairs. There was a creepy rumor that when the cats found her, they might have chewed on some of her body parts. I can't even talk about it. That totally grosses me out. It makes me wonder if the 2 stray cats were associated with her. I couldn't take all 4 cats to my parents, but fortunately we found someone willing to adopt them. I always get chills when I think about that story. I never paid much attention to that kind of stuff either. But now I don't know what to believe. Let me tell you, once you experience something unexplainable firsthand, it's no longer fun. It's a memory that tears you apart from the inside out, and no matter how much you plead with people to believe you, even you can't convince yourself you sound anything other than crazy. I was 18 years old the first time my parents went out of town and left me home alone for the entire weekend. While to most kids my age this would have sounded like pure bliss, I was terrified. Pleaded for them to cancel their trip even. You see, I grew up in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and while beautiful during the daytime, I always found myself extremely paranoid at night. There were trees everywhere, and no way of knowing what was lurking behind them in the shadows. Not to mention, the trees towered so high above that oftentimes they shaded out any hint of moonlight, making it exceptionally difficult to see anything outside at night. Of course, this did not stop things on the outside from looking into my home. And though I never particularly caught anything peering through my windows, the hair on the back of my neck was always standing up as though something were. Oh, and did I mention the vast majority of the first story of my house was made up of sliding glass doors? Go figure. The only thing that kept me semi-sane while downstairs at night was my dog Rango. He was a particularly good guard dog and would cause a scene anytime he sensed something near the house. This is why that Saturday evening when my parents were gone and Rango started having a complete fit at the back door, I knew something was wrong. I tried to talk myself down at first. Chances are the thing setting Rango off could have been a deer, squirrel, or maybe even a raccoon digging in his food dish on the porch. These were way more logical and preferable to whatever the hell was actually out there that night. Being as adult as I possibly could, I told Rango to hush and even went as far as putting him in my parents' bedroom for a few minutes to get him to settle down. With Rango in the room and tamed from barking, an eerie silence fell over the house, and that's when I first heard it. This strange, sporadic clicking sound. It didn't seem to come at routine intervals. It was random, ranging in pitch and length. Almost how you hear raptors click to communicate with each other in old Jurassic Park films. I spent the next 5 minutes scouring the house, searching for the source of the clicking noise. But the more I searched, the less hope I had for finding it, and the more anxious I became. The last room I had to check off of my search was the kitchen, and when I heard the clicking coming from beyond the sink, outside of the window peering into my backyard, I could hardly breathe. My terror overtook me, and I sprinted to let Rango out of the room. That's when I saw it. It came sprinting into view, as if having followed me on the outside of the house, from the kitchen window to the back porch. The motion sensor lights lit up, and I cannot make up what I saw even if I wanted to. A pale white humanoid figure hunched over on all fours, moving faster than any person should be capable of in that position. It had a large, round face with gaping black eyes, but no nose that I could see. Its mouth hung open in the most sinister way, and it continued making those same deafening clicking noises, but now even louder than before. I let out the most blood-curdling scream and flung open the door to my parents' bedroom. Rango sprung into action, charging the glass slider and barking more aggressively than he ever has before. The hair on his body was raised, his paws slammed into the glass, and if there were no barrier between the two, I'm confident Rango would have ripped that thing to shreds. The creature seemed startled by Rango's appearance and jolted back and forth across the porch as if to evade his advancements. I'm not sure how I worked up the courage to do what I did next, but it was as though my mind weren't in control of my body. I sprinted towards the glass and grabbed Rango's collar, bringing me face to face with the creature. It threw itself at the glass in an attempt to pounce, at which point I was almost certain I'd have a fatal heart attack. I flailed backwards, Rango following closely behind, and could only manage to make my legs work for 15 seconds more as I threw myself up the stairs and into my room. I slammed the door and locked it, but even that wasn't providing the security it needed to. I had a window in my room and could not bear to be anywhere near it. So naturally, I huddled Rango and I inside my small closet and did not hesitate to dial 911. To cut to the chase, all but one of the police officers who'd heard a story of a similar creature did not believe me about the encounter, and as the story goes, there was absolutely no evidence, not even a footprint in the wet dirt to support my case. But honestly, their belief wasn't what I needed. All I needed was to never be alone in that house again, which I accomplished when I had the sudden urge to go to college far away in the city. I typically refrain from bringing up the story nowadays, mainly because I don't indulge in reliving the experience. But no matter how far away I am from that dreaded creature, it still seems to find a way to haunt me, even if now only in my dreams. My best friend lives 5 minutes away from me. It's super easy to get to their house, just 2 back roads and a left turn. But I'll admit, the second of the 2 roads is lined with trees and can be a little creepy to drive at night. Regardless of this, I always drove the back roads. Driving the opposite direction took significantly longer. At this age, I really have no excuse to avoid a road solely because it's in the woods and feels creepy. Well, that was until last night. It's hard to put the encounter into words without sounding crazy, even though I've always found cryptids fascinating. I thought creatures like this were just for fun, stories to tell around a bonfire. And not only that, but I live in Delaware. I mean, nothing out of the ordinary ever happens here. I'm making a left onto this back road and remember thinking it was eerily dark. I look up at the sky and it must have been a new moon or something because it was bare. Not even a star to look at. Not to mention the most putrid smell was in the air. I thought for sure someone must have hit a skunk or the old creek had overflowed. After a couple seconds of driving, I flash on my high beams because I can hardly see, and that's when I saw it. I slammed my brakes, my breath caught in my throat. It was like for a minute everything stopped. It must have been every bit of 8 feet tall, reared up on its back legs in the middle of the road. I guess in situations like that, your brain does everything possible to explain away what you're seeing. And as much as I would have been relieved to say this thing was a malnourished horse, it simply wasn't. While its face did look like a horse, it had these horns protruding out of its head, wrapping backwards almost like you'd expect to see on a goat. And while I can't be certain, it looked as though its skin was scaly, not furry, because of the way it clung to the bones underneath. Despite how skeletal this thing was, my brain is still racing, seeking any explanation possible as to what it is. That's when its wings jut out. They were bony, tattered, and ripped up in several places. I obviously knew there was no way a bat could be this big, but perhaps the scientists were wrong, and pterodactyls weren't extinct. Like I said, my mind was trying to explain this away any way it possibly could. I wasn't sure the thing would be able to fly with how beat up it looked, but I was not sticking around to find out. It felt like an eternity had passed since turning down this road, but I know in actuality it must have been only 10 seconds max. Yet, it was as though my body had forgotten how to work a car. I could not for the life of me figure out how to shift into reverse. As the danger I'm in starts to settle over me, I panic. My palms are sweaty, I'm breathing heavy and desperately trying to get the car out of drive. I likely fumbled around for only 5 seconds, but in this situation, that was far too long. I look up, and the creature slowly rotates its body to face my car, and its piercing yellow eyes seem to lock with mine. Screw the reverse. I knew if I wanted to live, the time was now or never. I slammed my foot on the gas and thanked God every day that there was a small clearance onto the right side of the road before the trees began. My car lurched off the cement onto the grass, and I completed the fastest U-turn imaginable. When I'm finally facing the opposite direction, I launch my car back up onto the road. I'm thinking to myself, if I stay in the dirt, my tires may spin, and that's time I cannot afford to waste. Since having turned the car, the road in my rear view fell pitch black once again, besides 2 glowing dots. I knew it was the creature's eyes, still looking in my direction. And what's worse, they started moving. To say I'm lucky that nothing or nobody was in front of me while driving is an understatement. I wouldn't have seen them if there was, because my eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. At first, the eyes seemed to bounce up and down, a movement that told me this thing must have been galloping towards me. Despite my anguish in realizing this, my foot did not waver. A quick glance at the speedometer told me I was already running at 95 miles per hour and had no intentions of easing up. Suddenly, the eyes stopped moving up and down and instead shot straight into the air, out of sight in my rear view. The pit in my stomach became astronomically bigger as it dawned on me that this thing was now in the air. As much as I was terrified to exit the safety of my car, I knew at that point the most logical decision was to get home and back in my house. At the very least, my parents would be there, and I wouldn't be facing this thing alone. As you can imagine, I got home in record speed and didn't even pause to think when I threw my car in park and ran inside without even turning it off. It's been 4 months since the encounter with that creature, and I see a virtual therapist 3 times a week to manage my fear of leaving the house. I'm doing my best to implement the best practices I'm given, but one thing is for certain. Even when I work up the courage to drive on my own, I know I will never be driving that back road again. No one ever wants to be the person that saw something unbelievable. I live in southern Georgia. I won't tell you my exact location because I don't want anyone to pinpoint who I am. Plus, it could be dangerous here. No one needs to come around here trying to track things down. I own a decent little cabin on the outskirts of town. The main reason I bought it is because of the wrap around porch. The backside of my cabin overlooks a creek. My entire property spans 12 wooded acres, so it is my own private getaway. I work a high-paced job at my local ER, so having the view that I have gives me some nice quiet time. I see deer often. I've also seen a wildcat and even a few bears. Mostly deer, though. I leave out corn near the creek for the deer. If you didn't know, deer love corn, especially if it's still on the cob. I get to sit out back and watch the wildlife and listen to the creek. It helps me relax after 24+ hours at the hospital. I noticed about 3 weeks ago that the corn I was leaving out was not being touched. This did happen a while back when we had a big old black bear roaming the area. He didn't stay long and the deer came back to munch on corn in just a few days. Anyways, this morning I came home as usual. When I pulled up my driveway, I could see that my trash can had been dumped over and there was trash everywhere. Sometimes raccoons or even a bear will get into the trash, but they've never made that bad of a mess. This was crazy. Containers and bottles were opened, and it seemed like things had been separated into gross trash piles. I grabbed a few trash bags and some gloves so I could pick it all up. It was pretty annoying, but it was my fault for forgetting to put the lock on it the last time I brought my trash out. So I go inside and take a shower, then decide to make myself some breakfast. Nothing crazy, avocado toast and some scrambled eggs with a glass of fresh orange juice on the side. It was still pretty cool out, so I decided to go sit on the back porch, just relax, maybe check on my deer. I sat down at my little patio table, just like I have a million other times. ready to eat and thinking about doing some yoga after my food settles, I smelled something terrible. It was a rancid mix of hot, unwashed armpits and dirty, wet dog. I gagged, it was so bad. Then I heard the growling. It was coming from the corner of my porch. There was a huge man. Gigantic, honestly. He was at least 10 feet tall. He was covered in black, coarse hair, but not on his face. I could see his beady black eyes clear as day. He was angry and had his huge, ape-like hands balled up into a fist. He let out a loud roar from his mouth, which really didn't look much different than any human's mouth, but his teeth were very large and yellow. I could smell his breath from where I was standing. My brain was just trying to process what I was looking at, and for some reason I was not scared. I just knew I had two options: fight or flight. I just looked at him and then motioned to my plate. I started backing away slowly. I knew I had my cell phone in my pocket so I could use the automated entry to get through my front door. He roared again, but luckily he did not move towards me. I felt like he could probably move fast, just based on how large his feet were. They were humongous, just like him. I just said to him, "You can have that food. I'm not really all that hungry." Don't ask me why I said that. I know how insane it sounds hours later. Me telling a strange creature on my back porch that I'm not hungry. I backed around the corner and moved quickly to my front door. I did not hear him follow me, which I am still thankful for. I unlocked the front door and went inside. I locked and bolted the front door. I stopped at the hall closet and grabbed my can of bear mace. Luckily, I bought it back when I was worried about that big black bear. I went straight to my back door and bolted it too. Even now, I am not sure that it would keep him out if he tried to come in through either door. So far, it seems to be working. I did peek out my kitchen window and my food was gone along with the plate. My utensils and juice glass were scattered on the porch in front of my table, which I am assuming he knocked over. I didn't see him anywhere. Thinking about it now, I think that man or creature or thing went through my trash. I do really also think that if he wanted to hurt me, he could have. He didn't try to get in the house, he just ate food and left. I've just been sitting here trying to wrap my mind around the situation, to be honest.